Karen has always been the boss of the neighborhood, but her arrogance has cost her dearly. When the HOA runs into financial problems, the association ends up being sold to a new owner. The detail? This new owner is exactly the person Karen tried to oust. If there was one saying that defined that neighborhood, it was, either follow the rules or suffer the consequences. And who was dictating those rules? A woman who carried a notebook as if it were an extension of her own hand. She was the HOA incarnate. The neighborhood was her board, and all of us, her disposable pieces. I'd lived there for 3 years. I was never the most popular neighbor, but I was never any trouble either. I paid my taxes on time, kept my lawn mowed, and never parked my car on the sidewalk like some people did. But that wasn't enough for her. For that woman, anything that got out of hand was a personal affront. The first sign that my patience was about to be tested was when I received an infringement notice in my mailbox. The reason? My garbage can was 3 centimeters out of standard alignment. Yes, 3 centimeters. As if the position of my garbage can was going to shake the foundation of civilization. At first, I ignored it. After all, it was ridiculous. But soon, there were more. Your lawn is a different shade of green from the others. The curtains in your window don't match the aesthetics of the neighborhood. Your car is too clean and reflects too much sun. It might bother the neighbors. Every week, a new note, a new infraction invented. It was as if she lay awake at night, thinking up new regulations just for me. But I still tried to take it in my stride. I thought, let this woman live the illusion that she owns the neighborhood. One day, it'll come back to her. Then came the bombshell, a formal letter from the HOA, claiming that I was in serious violation of community standards, and that if I didn't correct my infractions immediately, I would be forced to sell my house. Now, mind you, I'm a patient guy, but patient has its limits. Who did this woman think she was? I went into investigative mode. I wasn't just going to accept a tyrant with a pen and pad kicking me out of my own house. So I decided to do what no one else had the guts to do. Look up the HOA numbers. It was one of those days when the heat made even the shade sweat. I went to the association's office, which was located in one of those trendy buildings that reeked of stale coffee and administrative despair. I asked to see the financial reports for the last few years, something every member was entitled to. The receptionist, a friendly woman with the eyes of someone who has put up with the queen of the HOA for far too long, just gave me a smile and slid the folder over to me, without even asking why. And that's when the party started. The documents were a mess. Money coming and going without explanation. Payments for landscaping services that never happened. Randomly applied fines and transfers to accounts that weren't in the association's name. Ah, but that wasn't even the best of it. The best came when I got to the internal records and discovered a precious detail. The HOA was broke. The Queen Supreme had spent so much time inventing idiotic rules that she had forgotten to keep the association functional. They were deep in debt, and I knew exactly what that meant. Soon, someone was going to buy the debt and take over. And guess who had a newfound interest in taking over? Mr. She wanted me out? Well, now I was going to show her how to play the game. Buying a broken HOA is like buying a bankrupt circus. You inherit the clowns, the dirt, and the chaos. But I didn't see it as a problem. I saw it as an opportunity. It turned out that, as well as having a good financial background, I had a great lawyer, one of those who love to dismantle mismanaged bureaucracies. He went through the HOA records and confirmed anyone who bought the debt would essentially become the owner of the association. The Queen Supreme? She didn't own anything. She was just a volunteer turned emperor. We closed the deal in record time. It was all very discreet. I made the purchase through a legal entity without revealing my identity. And then, one fine sunny morning, while the woman was making her daily rounds with that killer little notebook, an official letter was sent to all the residents. The HOA was under new management. And who was the new administrator? Guess who? Ah, The moment she found out was Oscar-worthy. I was sitting on my balcony, enjoying a cup of coffee, when I saw the woman crossing the street with her phone stuck to her ear, as red as a tomato about to explode. She stopped in front of my house and stared at me as if I were an alien invader. "This is a mistake," she spat, holding the paper tight enough to crumple it. I took a sip of coffee. "No, it's not. Do you want me to explain the details?" She shook her head, as if trying to process the absurd idea that someone, anyone, could challenge her. You can't just buy the HOA." "But I can," I replied, savoring every word. And I did. It was at that moment that I saw something rare: hesitation. For the first time, the big boss seemed genuinely unresponsive. The problem with people who spend their lives abusing power is that they never consider the possibility of losing it. And this woman, in particular, was absolutely certain that the neighborhood revolved around her. Now, suddenly, she was just another resident, subject to the rules she used to make up for others. But I didn't just want to take control. That would be too easy. I wanted to reform this paper empire and show her what it was like to live under a fairer government. So, on the first day of the new administration, I published the first changes to the HOA's rules. Now, no penalty could be applied without a concrete justification and the approval of at least 3 members of the association. If it wasn't legitimate, it wouldn't be approved. And best of all, new elections for the committee. Yes, because guess what? The woman hadn't been democratically elected. She simply took over because no one else wanted to deal with the bureaucracy. But now, with the power to remove that kind of person, I wanted to ensure that any future administrator was chosen by the neighborhood, and not by self-proclamation. The result? The whole neighborhood went wild. People who had always hated the woman, but never had the courage to stand up to her, started celebrating. I received more compliments in one day than I had in 3 years of living there. And what about her? Well, needless to say, the woman had an outburst. First, she tried sending angry emails to everyone, claiming that the new management was illegal. When that didn't work, she tried to convince some neighbors to sign a petition against me. Unfortunately for her, no one was interested in restoring the era of terror. But the pinnacle of her defeat came on the day of the HOA's official assembly. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the home of one of the neighborhood's oldest residents. When I arrived, I saw that practically everyone had turned up, more people than at any previous HOA meeting. Even the more reserved neighbors, the ones who don't normally get involved, were there, probably just to watch the circus go down in flames. The woman was already seated, arms crossed, glaring at anyone who looked at her. When I started the meeting, I got straight to the point. I explained the HOA's financial situation, the changes implemented, and the proposal for new elections. It was at that moment that she stood up abruptly. "This is absurd!" she shouted. "This neighborhood has always had rules to maintain order. You're ruining everything." I took a deep breath and smiled. "You mean I'm ruining your private dictatorship?" The discreet giggles of some neighbors made her even angrier. "If it weren't for the rules, this place would be chaos. I've done an impeccable job." I crossed my arms. "Is that so? Because, from what I've seen in the records, you've done an impeccable job, sinking this association into debt." Silence. "By the way," I continued, picking up one of the documents and holding it in the air, "where exactly did the $15,000 spent on sidewalk maintenance end up? Because, as far as I know, no work has been done in the neighborhood in the last 2 years." All eyes began to turn to her. Whispers began to spread. And that's when I realized the woman wasn't just indignant. She was afraid. For the first time, the neighbors began to realize that maybe, just maybe, her time in charge hadn't been as honest as she liked to pretend. And that was just the beginning. She tried to argue. She tried lying. But at the end of the day, one thing was clear. Her reign was over. Now, the real question was, what else was she hiding? If there's one thing people don't understand about falls from power, it's that they don't happen all at once. It's not like pulling a plug. and the light goes out. The fall of someone like her is a long, humiliating, and, above all, painful process. The woman didn't accept defeat immediately, nor could she. Spending years reigning over an entire neighborhood, dictating absurd rules, controlling everyone's lives? It was obvious that the idea of being just an ordinary resident was unbearable for her. But then it hit her, and when it did, she went into desperation mode. First came the attempt to control the damage. She created a neighborhood Facebook group, the same one where she used to expose anyone who didn't follow her rules, and posted a melodramatic open letter about how she was being unfairly attacked by corrupt forces. If it was an attempt to reverse the situation, it failed miserably. The neighbors were no longer the same frightened little sheep as before. The era of fear was over, and now every comment on her post was a festival of criticism. So you mean the sidewalks were never renovated, but your house got a new coat of paint last year? Interesting. Funny. Because at the last meeting you swore that the HOA was financially healthy. Are you complaining now? You should have thought of that before sticking your hand in other people's money. It was a digital massacre. She deleted the post in less than 24 hours. What followed was a spectacle worthy of popcorn. The HOA committee, now without her presence, authorized the opening of a lawsuit to recover the embezzled money. This meant that she would have to pay it all back. And guess what? She couldn't. For years, the woman lived like a queen. But do you know what happens when a castle is built on quicksand? It sinks. The neighbors demanded a formal investigation. The local authorities began to review the documents, and as more irregularities appeared, things only got worse for her. But the real final blow came in the most ironic way possible. She always loved fining others, right? Well, it was her turn to taste her own poison. I discovered that she herself was in violation of the HOA rules she loved so much. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the very woman who was always handing out fines had irregularities at her house. Her yard? It had a fence outside the standards approved by the HOA. The lawn? Not only was it poorly maintained, but the plants she demanded so much from others didn't even exist there. Each item resulted in hefty fines, accumulating to a surreal amount. And since I was the new owner of the HOA, guess what? I made a point of enforcing every single one of them. The same regulations she had used to make others miserable now turned on her like a flock of hungry vultures. She tried to appeal. She tried to argue. But there was no one else to listen. The woman who had loved throwing others out of the neighborhood was now faced with the only option left: sell the house and leave forever. On moving day, I woke up early and made a point of watching the scene from my balcony, hot coffee in hand and a smile on my face. Moving trucks were parked in front of her house. The woman's face was a mixture of anger and humiliation as she loaded the last of her boxes into the vehicle. The neighbors watched discreetly from their windows. Some giggled, others just nodded in silent satisfaction. After all, she had earned it. While she finished loading everything, I decided to give her one last parting gift. I walked calmly to the sidewalk and, with the greatest serenity in the world, said, "Well, well, I hope your new neighborhood is more understanding of your management methods." She stared at me, her eyes blazing with hatred. But I didn't say anything. She had nothing else to say. She got into her car, slammed the door, and drove off. And so ended her reign. No glory, no redemption. Just a big joke in the history of the neighborhood. After she left, the neighborhood underwent a real renovation. The HOA became something really functional. Money was used for what it was supposed to be used for, rules were simplified, and for the first time in years, residents didn't live in fear of getting stupid fines in their mailbox. Me? I carried on managing for a while. After all, it was nice to see a neighborhood finally being run by someone who didn't treat everyone like a subordinate. But after a year, I decided that my mission was accomplished. We organized a new election and passed the baton to a committee made up of neighbors who really wanted to make the place a better place. And now Now I live my life peacefully, with no ridiculous tickets, no arbitrary inspections, and, above all, no damn HOA queen to disturb the peace.